My father and I had not had the best relationship. He left when I was 9. So we had an on and off relationship for, better part of 15 years there. Got a job in his company. And that's what I always wanted to do. Always wanted to be the Fortune 500 guy. Wanted to put the suit, the tie, the briefcase, the whole thing. Wall Street, that was me. Power, everything. Power tie, power suit. That's what I wanted. So I got the job with Simon Property Group, and I went to live with him. And obviously, he started talking to me about the Lord. I ended up getting saved. I never really had trouble with finances and giving. And my father always said, if you can get this, you can get anything. Obviously, Jesus said, the love of money is the root of all evil. It's for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Very, very difficult. I see where that came from. So that was very early on to me. Started tithing and giving offerings immediately. There was not even the second thought of, should I do this, should I not do this? And I left the Simon Property Group in '96 to take over the Belleria of my grandparents. They were retiring, so I was going to take over the original. With the idea in my mind, because I told you power suit, power tie, power steering, the whole, that's me. The idea of taking over the whole thing. I took over the original Belleria in 1997, January of '97. About 2003, the building's just no good, it's collapsing, it cost too much to fix. I was looking to move it anywhere within a half-mile radius. So on the way home from work one day, God impressed upon me to claim a piece of property on the corner of Wick and McGuffey. I did so. The next day, I took out a $1,000 seed. I sowed it to a ministry that God had laid on my heart, and I did that. A few months later, after talking with the city and their economic development, talking about certain pieces of property, I ended up getting that property for about 1/10 of what it was worth. I ended up giving a donation because it was a charitable organization. I ended up giving a donation in lieu of foreclosure because they had some back taxes. Paid the back taxes, gave them a donation, and they gave me the property. Well, what has stood out to me, especially in the last few years, is who is your Lord? And when the Lord speaks, I move. And it's that simple. And there is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Now, have I missed it throughout the year? Sure, I'm human. Everybody misses it. And I know when I've missed it, because he'll bring it back to my remembrance. Remember I told you to do that and you didn't do that? Look at that. He'll say things like that. That's how he talks to me. Like I said, that's my relationship with God. It differs from other people's. The way he talks to me is not necessarily the way he'll talk to other people. He's very direct with me, sometimes very stern. To get to that level, you need to practice that. You need to practice that voice. And the second thing is start praying in the Holy Ghost. Because if you want to know what God wants, you better pray it out first, okay? And then you'll start to hear that voice. And then when you start listening to that voice, it becomes louder and louder.
Come on, can we give it up for Michael and Dara? Thank them for sharing their story. I want to welcome everybody that's joining us today. I want to say a special hello to everybody online, Facebook Live, YouTube, and of course, TCI. I want to just say, if you're watching us online, there's nothing like experiencing it live and in person at every campus. We would love to have you as our guest right here at BC Word. Can we give it up for everybody that's watching from all over the valley? Tell them we'd love to see them. If you're new here, or if my face looks unfamiliar, my name is Joe, and along with my beautiful wife, Erin, we get to serve as the pastors at BC Boardman, and it is always so much fun to come and hang with you. Actually, today we did a Joe swap, so Pastor Joe is in Boardman. He's preaching the message that he preached here last week, and I get to preach this message today. I love this series, and if you haven't been able to follow week to week, Man, it has been such an incredible series. I want to shout out Pastor Jimmy, Pastor Ryan, Pastor Joe. All of them did a phenomenal job. You go back in the archives, and if you want, this is something that I think would be really helpful. If you haven't already followed us on YouTube, just look for Believers Church OH and subscribe and click the notification bell so that every time we post content, you're the first to hear about it. And give us a follow on Facebook as well. That just notifies you when we go live. But it's been such an incredible series, and if you've been watching, you know this about the series. We realize that whenever you hear churches talk about money, people can get kind of funny about money, right? Because we've all seen it abused. We've seen the excess. We've seen the things that happen in the American church, and we're at an all-time low when it comes to trust with finances in church, and we get it. And so we just wanted from the onset to let you know that there are no special offerings being received during this series. We're not launching into a capital campaign next month or something like that. There's no high pressure give to get sales pitches in this message, I promise. Here's why we're doing this series. We really believe that most Christians want to live a more generous life, and they just don't know where to start. And so we thought, what if we do a series called Money Talks, where we just explore this idea, like, what does God have to say about my money, and what does my money say about me? And I want to start today and kind of kick off this message by saying that what I'm going to share today is something that I have witnessed and observed in the lives of my parents and my mother and father-in-law, and then like spiritual brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles for the entirety of my life. And some of you are already living in this, and for some of you, this is a brand new concept, and wherever you fall in that, we're just glad that you're here. And I want to start with the words of Jesus. We're going to go to the Sermon on the Mount. We did a whole series in the summer that was so beautiful. I'm just going to read one scripture out of the greatest sermon that was ever preached. One day, I really believe in heaven, there's going to be a heavenly Netflix. We're going to be able to go back and binge watch all of Jesus' messages like we were there. Wouldn't that be cool? Because he's the greatest preacher of all time. But this is the context, Matthew chapter 6. This is where we get messages like, don't worry about tomorrow, because today's got enough to worry about itself, right? And then Jesus says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and then everything else will be added unto you. So the context is provision and trusting God, and this is where we pick up in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21. Watch what Jesus says. For where your treasure is, there your heart, and I like what the Amplified adds here, there your heart and your wishes, your desires, that on which your life centers will be also. In other words, if my money, my treasure, if it could talk, it would reveal exactly where my heart is, exactly where my desires are and my passions and my plans and my dreams and my hopes, because that's what my money reveals according to Jesus. Proverbs 27:19 says something similar in a different way. As water reflects the face, so one's life reflects the heart. Maybe we could say it this way. It is impossible to hide what's in my heart. I can try all I want, but it comes out in everything I do. It comes out in every decision. It comes out in every conversation. It comes out in every post on social media. And yes, it indeed comes out in even every purchase. It's impossible to hide what's in my heart. Let me give you an example. I want to introduce you to somebody named Herbert Chavez. He's from the Philippines. And as far as I can tell, he's like one of the biggest fans of Superman on the planet. He is a super fan of Superman. And he has one of the biggest collections of Superman stuff on the planet, but this is where it gets a little bit crazy. He, in an effort to look more like the Man of Steel, has had 19 body-modifying surgeries and procedures to look more like Superman. So he spent tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars with this passion, and I just want to make two observations. One, I don't think he has a wife, just spitballing there, because she would shut that down in a hurry. He does have Lois, I guess, But then number two, and I don't think it's a stretch to say this, my guy really likes Superman, And the evidence is everywhere you look in his life. You could walk through any room of his house. I bet it's in every conversation. For sure, you'd see it in his bank account. He really loves Superman because it's impossible to hide what's in our heart. Actually, if you want to know what we're living for, you don't have to look any further than our bank account, right? I bet if we looked at some of our bank accounts, we would see we really value vacations and experiences. Maybe for some of us, you would see, wow, they really value sports and extracurriculars. A lot of their treasure goes in that direction. Maybe for some of us, we value our appearance and the image that we project. And so a lot of our treasure goes towards the clothes that we wear and the shoes that we have on, or the bags, the latest bag that we're looking for, ladies, right? Or maybe it's the house that we live in. Here's one. Maybe if you were to look at some of our bank accounts, you would see we place a high value on financial security and stability. And so a lot of our treasure goes towards Roth IRA and 401k and that sort of thing. And I want to say this, none of those things are wrong in and of themselves. It's just when they get on the wrong rung of the priority ladder that our lives begin to get off. But here's the point. It is impossible to hide what's in my heart. Now, why does this matter? Well, here's why. Because our heart is the number one indicator of health in our body. As our heart goes, so our whole life goes, right? If my heart's not healthy, my vital organs aren't healthy. I'm not going to be living very long, right? Well, the same goes for our spiritual heart. This is what Proverbs 4:23 says. Above all else, like you're going to do a lot of things as you follow God, but above all of those things, guard your heart. For everything you do flows from it. In other words, in the same way that everything flows from the heart in our natural bodies, if my heart's not healthy, my life's not healthy, out of the overflow of my heart come the issues or the boundaries of my life. And this is my prayer for Believers Church, that if Jesus, the great physician, was to give us a checkup, that we would get a clean bill of health. That he would say, man, Joe, your heart's looking healthy. Because he wants to see you go the distance. And he doesn't want you to have any blockages in your veins and your vessels. And God forbid you have a heart failure. He wants you to be better at 70 and 80 years old than you are now. He wants you to finish strong and finish well. And all of it goes back to our heart. Now, one of the biggest signs of a healthy heart is blood flow, right? And so I could take this message in a lot of different directions today, but here's how I felt God leading me to take it. I want to talk about living an overflowing life. And because I love subtitles and it hurts my heart a little bit not to have them, here's my subtitle if you're taking notes: Open Flow to Overflow. I'll explain that as we go. An overflowing life, open flow to overflow. It's fascinating how often this concept comes up, and I just want to highlight a couple of words. You can see these in the Bible everywhere. Let's look at open and flowing. Here's the first one. These are the words of Jesus. John chapter 7, verse 38. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, watch this, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. In other words, God's people ought to be a pipeline for his power to flow through. If we're really following Jesus, he should be able to work through this channel of his church to do his work in the world. Psalm 119:45, similar thing. I'll stride freely, I like this, through wide open spaces as I look for your truth and your wisdom. This is what a Jesus-centered life ought to look like. And watch the result. Then I'll tell the world what I find, and I'll speak out boldly in public, unembarrassed. Man, you want to know how to reach your neighbors and reach your family members and reach that kid in the locker room, one locker over? Reach that kid in your class, that student that sits next to you. Live a wide open life. Let them see what a free, overflowing life looks like as you follow Jesus. Now, real quick, let me address the elephant in the room. Because if you're anything like me, here's what you're thinking. Joe, this all sounds great, and I want to be generous. But like, if I'm being transparent with you, my life is anything but overflowing. It's not exactly overflowing in any way, especially when it comes to generosity and finances. And can I just encourage you, welcome to the club. We've all been there. But I want to encourage you actually with the words of God as he is speaking to Moses and the people of Israel when their life was nothing like overflowing or wide open. Actually, they had been enslaved to the Egyptians at this point for 400 years. Life's not looking real great for them. This is what God says to them. Let's read this together. Exodus 3, verse 7. God said, I've taken a good long look at the affliction of my people in Egypt. I've heard their cries for deliverance from their slave masters. I love this. and I know all about their pain. Can I just remind you that whatever pain you're going through today, God knows about your pain. And not only does he know about your pain, God cares about your pain, because watch what he says next. And now I have come down to help them, pry them loose from the grip of Egypt, get them out of that country and bring them to a good land, watch this, with wide open spaces, a land lush with milk and honey. One translation says flowing with milk and honey. The land of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, Gazunhite. Just felt right. You know who lived an overflowing life? Abraham. Remember, Father Abraham had many sons? Just because we're in church and it would be wrong not to, do y'all know where we're going with this? You ready to sing along? Ready? Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had... Come on. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's just praise the Lord. Give yourselves a hand. That was pretty good. Some of y'all didn't grow up in church, and you're like, what just happened? And I am so sorry. It had to be done. Now, here's where we're picking up. This is an incredible story. Remember, Abraham wasn't always called Abraham. You're going to hear him referenced as Abram. And the reason we can sing songs like that all trace back to this story. So just so you have the context, Abraham is honoring God with his life and his wealth, and God is blessing everything he touches. So much so, it's almost like he has the Midas touch. Everything he touches turns to gold. And so his house and his herd, they're expanding. Things are working really well for Abraham, and even the people connected to him are getting blessed. So enters Lot, and Lot is his nephew, and Lot's getting so blessed that Lot's herds and his herdsmen are bumping up against Abraham's, and conflict ensues. This is where we pick up in Genesis chapter 13, verse 8. Finally, Abraham said to Lot, let's not allow this conflict to come between us or our herdsmen. After all, we are close relatives. The whole countryside is open to you. Watch how generous Abraham is with Lot. Take your choice of any section of the land you want, and we will separate. If you want the land to the left, then I'll take the land on the right. If you prefer the land on the right, then I'll go to the left. Time out. Can you hear the freedom in Abraham's voice as he makes him this offer? I don't know about you, but I would imagine that Abraham could have been tempted to say, I'm going to take the best portion of the land for myself. Because think about it, Abraham is his elder. He could have said, boy, I've been doing this thing longer than you've been alive. You can have the leftovers. I get the best stuff. But why does he do this? Abraham is so confident in God's ability to bless him and take care of him that he prefers Lot. And here's really what Abraham knew. Abraham knew that the land is not my source. The Lord is my source. Really, what he actually knew is that not even Lot is my source. Can I just encourage you with this thought that when it feels like, some of us feel like this right now, that somebody's lying about us or taking advantage of us, can I just remind you that nobody can stop a flow of God that he's already started? And no man can curse what God has called blessed. Some of us are like, man, when will the promotion at work happen? When will my boss finally see me? I feel overlooked. And we need to remember that promotion doesn't come from the east or the west or the south. Promotion comes from the Lord. And he opens doors that no man can shut. And he shuts doors that no man can open. The land is not my source. The Lord is my source. I'm just hitting things up here. How about it just a reminder as we're under 30 days away from this very important election? Can I just remind you that your presidential candidate is not your source? That even if the candidate on the other side of the aisle ends up in the Oval Office, it has nothing to do with how God can bless you. Because we operate in a different economy. We belong to the economy of the kingdom of heaven. And the land is not my source, and Lot is not my source. The Lord is my source. Anybody at every campus just thankful that God takes care of his kids? Come on, got me excited in church today. Now, the Bible's funny, okay? This is how you know it's real, because there's just real people doing real people things. I want you to watch what Lot does next. This is exactly what you'd expect him to do. Genesis 13:10. Lot took a long look at the fertile plains of the Jordan Valley in the direction of Zoar. I like long look because it implies that he's kind of milking the moment. He's just rumming it in. He's just taking his good old time. And the whole area was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord or the beautiful land of Egypt. And watch this. Lot chose, you kind of see his motives here, for himself the whole Jordan Valley. Now, this had to be some gorgeous land if they're comparing it to the garden of God. Can you imagine how beautiful this land is? If you have herds that are growing, water is really important. This is lush land with lots of water. But here, Abraham says you can take it. So Lot chose it for himself. Abraham takes the lesser land, prefers his nephew, and trusts God. You know what impresses me the most about Abraham? It's just the purity of his heart. I don't know about you, but if I were in his shoes, I would have probably been tempted to feel a little bit of resentment or bitterness towards Lot. Like that weasel took the whole Jordan plain, you know? But that's not what he chooses to do. He keeps his heart right and tender. And when I look at my life, one of the biggest things that stands in the way of me living an overflowing life is blockages of the heart. Really, this is the number one reason that hearts stop working to begin with, right? Plaque and gunk slowly builds up on the walls of our arteries. And I think we all would agree that most people, heart attacks don't happen when you're 20. No, a heart attack happens one cheeseburger at a time, you know? It's just one little thing after the other, and slowly over time, blockages begin to build up. If we want to live an overflowing life, and we're looking at our life and we're saying, man, it doesn't seem like my life is overflowing, I wonder if there might be some blockages present in our life. Let me give you a good example. I want to show you a picture. You'll probably remember this because it made like national and international news back in 2021. Do you remember this cargo ship called the Ever Given on the Suez Canal? Now, a windstorm came along and it blew it sideways, and so it stuck to the walls of the Suez Canal, and you look at it from above and you think, can't they just get a tugboat and get that thing back where it needs to go? But the problem is that it's 1,300 feet long, and this blew my mind. It weighs 224,000 tons. So it's not going anywhere in a hurry. Now, not only was it holding up its cargo and its containers, but there were 369 other cargo ships that are in the queue trying to get through the Suez Canal. And it is holding up all of them and all of their resources. And that represented $9.6 billion in economic trade. Can you imagine that? And I wonder if this is a picture of some of our lives spiritually. It's not that we don't want to be used by God, and it's not that we don't want to flow in his blessing, but maybe just somewhere along the way, a blockage happens. I call them blessing blockers. Maybe I could just list a couple for you, and this would be helpful. And I'm going to invite you to write down the ones that stand out to you. I don't think all of these will apply to each person here, but I bet online, listening in the archives later, right here in the room, I bet there are some that God's going to highlight to you, and he's going to show you, man, I would love to be flowing in your life, but there's some blessing blockers present. Here's the first one. It's discontentment. Or like another way to say it would be dissatisfaction with what I have when I compare it to what others have. And can I just remind you that we live in a world that spends billions of dollars every day to convince us that what we have is not enough. And so we're constantly, if we're doing what the culture teaches us to do, without even thinking, it's just the default, we are constantly in the pursuit of more. I call it the mirage of more. Because we see more in the distance, and maybe it's more money. If I could just have more zeros at the end of my paycheck, then I would have fulfillment. If I could just have more friends, if I could just have more experiences, if I could just date more people, if I could just be invited student to more parties and get into more social circles, then I would have satisfaction. If I could just have more cars, if I could just have more in my retirement account, if I could just have fill in the blank with more. It's a mirage, if you will. And here's the problem with the mirage. By the time you get to the more, it disappears and you see a new mirage of more in the distance. And how many of us spend our entire lives pursuing more? And here's what Jesus says. He says, there's a different kind of more and you're missing it. He says, I have come to give you life, and life what? Life more abundantly. That's the only more that will satisfy your soul. And so if we spend our time discontent and dissatisfied with what God's blessed us with, it can be a blessing blocker. And it's not always financial. Let's go a little deeper. Here's one that I know I've struggled with a ton. It's the blessing blocker of unforgiveness. Maybe it's the blessing blocker of offense. And if you're in a church long enough, it's not if, it's when. We talk about this all the time. If I could reference a message in the archives and invite you to listen if you haven't already, we preached a message called Help, I Have Church Hurt a couple years ago. And it will really help you if you're struggling with that. But it can be legitimate sometimes, right? I know I've been in this church my whole life, and this room has held a lot of positive memories for me, but this room has also held a lot of pain for me. Some of the people that have been the biggest blessing in my life have also caused some of the greatest pain in my life. And that's just the way it works in relationships, right? The closer we are, the more risk in our relationships, the more we have the ability to hurt each other, right? So what begins to happen is when we get hurt, we say things like this, man, I gave to that person the one time and they took advantage of me. So fool me once, shame on them. Fool me twice, shame on me. I'm not going to be generous like I was before. Or we think, man, like I keep letting people in and they keep hurting me and letting me down and betraying me. And so we don't even mean to do it, but we start to build up these walls around us. That's why Proverbs says a brother offended is harder to win over than a strong city. His offenses are like the bars of a castle. And we just kind of build this prison of offense and unforgiveness. And here's the sad thing. We're keeping the bad out, but the other side is that we're keeping the good out too. Everything's blocked. And I remember years ago, I was just struggling with that thought. And I just would have these prayers. God, every time I pour into other people, it just feels like I get taken advantage of or they hurt me or wrong me. I would just rather not interact with new people at all. And I remember God speaking this to me. He said, hey, Joe, do you want to live a little life? Because if you want to live a little life and you want to shut yourself off from the rest of the world, you can. But he said, I think there's bigger stuff in you. And I've called you to live a big life. And you can shrink to the level of your pain or you can rise to the level of your purpose. The choice is yours. Yeah, we can give it up for that. We want to live a big life. Think about this. Jesus gave his entire life to people that he foreknew would hurt him and betray him and let him down and abandon him. And oh yeah, crucify him. Yet Jesus loves Judas just as much as he loves his beloved John. And his blood flows for the very people that were going to make him bleed. Talk about living a big life. How about Joseph? If anybody had a right to be bitter, it's Joseph. Shares his dreams with his brothers and they weren't having it. They throw him in a pit and then sell him into slavery. I don't know how bad your brothers are, but I'm sure they're not that bad. Have they ever sold you into slavery? But then he ends up in Potiphar's house and he's managing the house well and he gets promoted. But then Potiphar's wife thinks he's attractive and tries to seduce him. He doesn't give in, so she claims he raped her or tried to. And he gets thrown into prison. And even in prison, you can't hold him down. He's living a big life in prison. He gets promoted to taking care of the prison that he's in. And I think this is pretty wild. Remember, the whole thing started because Joseph had a dream in his heart that God gave him. And he could have been sitting in prison so frustrated that he wasn't walking out his dreams. But what does he do? He starts to serve the dreams of others while he's in the prison. Man, even when it feels like your blessings are delayed and it feels like everybody else is getting their prayers answered, can I just encourage you, just keep serving other people. Just keep believing in other people. Live a big life. Love them. And I'm telling you, God will bless you. So maybe it's that. Maybe it's fear or scarcity mentality. Like if I give, I won't have enough. I think all of us can relate to that, especially in the economy that we're in. Pinching pennies, like, man, that's a reasonable thing to worry about. And Aaron and I have learned this lesson a lot. I'll give you one example. I just want to be transparent today so it's helpful. You know, I always heard my parents talk about having a pastor's heart and a shepherd's heart, and I never really understood what that meant until I started pastoring. And there's this crazy thing that happens when you pastor people and you choose to put your roots down and do life with people in a community. Your hearts become tethered together. So I'll just be minding my business on a Saturday and somebody will pop up in my mind. I'm like, man, I haven't seen them in a month of Sundays. I wonder if they're doing okay. And so I'll text them and they'll say, that's crazy because you have no clue what we were going through just yesterday. And man, we were just thinking we needed somebody to encourage us. And then I'm able to connect them with someone. It's a shepherd's heart. And that's amazing. But then here's the other side of it. If you're not careful, in your close connection with people and pouring your heart into people, when people inevitably move on, go to another church in town. If you're a church for 41 years, you're not the hot new church in town all 41 years, And sometimes people you've really poured into, they're like, I'm going to go check this out, and it can feel painful. Or sometimes people move away, or they go to another ministry. We've had that happen a million times over 41 years. And it's easy, if you're not careful, to say, those are my sheep. That's my member. And God has had to work this out of me, and my parents have helped me so much over the years, but He's just reminded me that, hey, you are a shepherd, but you're an under shepherd. He's the great shepherd. It's His church. And I've learned to hold on to people a little bit more loosely, and there's a freedom in that. And here's what Aaron and I have decided to do. And I've watched my parents do this for years. When somebody decides to leave, we don't see them as going. We see it as sowing. They're not going, we're sowing. There's a great pastor named Rich Wilkerson Jr. in Miami, and he has an incredible church, and he was being pretty vulnerable about a similar struggle. He said during COVID, they had a lot of people, there was just a shuffling of people that were going to other churches and people he had really poured time into, and in particular, a lot of staff. And he said it was really heartbreaking because we had poured our time and energy and resources and everything we had into them. And then some of them, I even connected them with other pastors in other cities that I love. And he said, I was kind of having this prayer with God in my time with him. And I prayed, God, what if we keep investing in people and they leave us? And God posed a different question. He said, well, what if you stop investing in them and they stay? Isn't that good? What if it wasn't that they're going? What if it was that we were sowing? I think it's so much better to see it that way. And we've just decided in our church that we don't want to just be known for our seating capacity and how many people we can just gather under the Believers Church banner. We want to be known for our sending capacity. And we want God to use us. I want to be a current that He can flow through. And you know what? I've noticed this, leaders, business owners. I just want to give you a little tip because I've done it both ways. Leaders are a lot more fun to follow when they're not holding on to people and resources and things with a death grip. When people can just see that you just want the best for them. And I've had to come to this place where it's like, this is not the Joe show. If I weren't here, if my dad weren't here, my mom weren't here, God would raise somebody else up and He would use them because Warren, Ohio needs reaching. And this isn't about trying to find found sheep in other pastures. This is about trying to go after the one. This is about trying to find people that don't know Jesus yet. That's why we exist. And I want you to think about this. Who will God bless more? The person that when He hands them a resource, they hold on to it and they never let it go, and they white knuckle every person and every dollar and everything that's within their possession, or the person that says, God, my hands are open to give, but I thank you that as my hands are open to give, my hands are also open to receive. I don't want to be a stagnant pond. I want to be a flowing river, overflowing with God's goodness. Here's where I want to end. I want to take the next few minutes as we land this plane, and I want to give you 2 points from the passage, Abraham and Lot. Here's the first one. Sow comes before flow. Write that down. Sow comes before flow. We see Abraham, even in his inconvenience, sow into Lot's life. And really, here's why Abraham is doing this. He realizes a principle. This works in any area of life, spiritually as well. You cannot reap a harvest unless you sow a seed. So let's ask a question personally in our own life. This is just between you and God. What am I sowing? And here's a better question. Am I sowing where I want to be flowing? Am I sowing where I want to be going? Because what I sow today is what I'll reap tomorrow. And I cannot reap a harvest until I sow a seed. Let's get really practical. Married people, if I want to reap a marriage with a selfless spouse, then I need to sow a seed of selflessness and love my spouse right where they are. If I want to own a business one day where my employees work really hard for me, man, then I have to make sure that I'm working really hard for my employer. Am I sowing working hard for them? Am I not cheating them out of the hours that I say I'm working? Jesus said this in Luke 16. He says, if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? Singles, man, I want you to get this because I see so many single people here and young people. If you could sow in your single years, you have no clue how much it will impact you in your married years. I went 14, 15 years into my marriage trying to undo bad decisions that I made when I was 13 and 15 years old. Can you imagine how good of a start you could get if you could date with integrity? If you could say, hey man, I'm not sleeping with you. The first person I'm going to sleep with is my husband or my wife someday. And I'm going to live like nobody else in the culture, a pure life with integrity. And guess what? Then my marriage is going to be built on a healthy foundation. Do any adults want to just say amen to that for all the young people and single people? All the single ladies. Okay. Anytime Aaron and I want to see a flow, we've learned to sow. I'll give you one example. I was on a trip a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, and I had to use an Uber, and I hadn't used one before. And so I was looking on the app, and I got into the conversation with my driver. She's a grandma, and she was the sweetest Christian lady you've ever met. And so we had a half an hour together, and we're talking about the state of the world, intercessory prayer. I mean, we had ourselves a conversation. And so at the end of the conversation, I hear God whispering to me, you need to really bless her with a tip. And so I was like, yes, Lord, I can do that. And so I was going to give her a tip that was pretty close to what the fare for the Uber was to begin with. And I did it on the app, and then the day started going by, but I never got a confirmation email. So I thought maybe God wasn't happy with how much I gave her, and he's giving me a second chance, do better, Joe. So this time I gave more than my fare. Well, later in the day, I get not one, but 2 confirmation emails from Uber, and it looks like I double blessed my Uber driver. Can I get an amen? And so, but you know what? I wasn't worried about it one bit. I didn't call and ask for a refund. I just think, God, you must have really wanted to bless her today. You must have really wanted to show her your faithfulness. And I've been the recipient of that so many times. But whenever we want to see a flow, we sow. So are you sowing where you want to be flowing? Here's the second and final point. Open flow leads to overflow. Open flow leads to overflow. Now remember, Abraham tells Lot, look in any direction as far as the eye can see, and it's yours. And I love what happens next. This is Genesis 13. After Lot had gone, the Lord said to Abram, watch this, look as far as you can see in every direction, north, south, east, and west. Very interesting wording. And he says, I'm giving all this land as far as you can see to you and your descendants as a permanent possession. And I will give you so many descendants that like the dust of the earth, they cannot be counted. He's talking about you and me. Go and walk through the land in every direction, for I am giving it to you. What's this sound like to you? I don't know about you, but it sounds like overflow to me. And here's the reality. Open flow leads to overflow. Here's the way to say it. You can't outgive God. And there is no losing in giving. Give and it will be given back to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and what? Running over, overflowing will other people give back to you. Open flow leads to overflow. I want to share a quick story. I just want to give you practical examples of how this is working in our life. And I want to say this. I always grew up watching my parents live this faith-filled life. My dad always had so many cool stories of blessing and just trusting God and giving. I would watch my parents give and sacrifice in ways no one would ever know. And I would always think, man, you don't have that. And you're stretching yourself. And they lived an overflowing life. And I always thought, man, I want to have stories like that someday. Well, 3 years ago, Aaron and I went out on a date night. And have you ever been neglecting going on a date night so much that by the time you get on the date night, you really haven't had a face-to-face conversation without the kids for a couple of months, and you end up just talking through all your problems on the date night, just me? Okay, awesome. And so we had a good dinner, but we're on our way home, and things come up. And it was really financial that night. We were talking about all these things we had to pay for and we needed. And we had a lot of needs, like we had just enrolled our kids in a private Christian school because we felt God wanted us to do it, and that wasn't cheap. We had one car, we needed a second car, and we were putting a lot of miles on our cars. And then we were just looking at our budget and we were like, man, we need to save for a house and we need a down payment and it's going to take several years to even get there, to get in the house we want. And then we had some debt we were chipping away at. And so any one of those things would have been too much for us to handle. Then to top it all off, earlier that day, Erin's parents and her sisters had invited us to go on a vacation. And they were like, hey, we're going to get this beautiful Airbnb. It's a beach house. Let's all go in on it together. And we had just really committed to God. We're not going to spend extra money. And we didn't have any to spare. So we had to tell them we'll have to go next time. And so it was just kind of devastating. And Erin's like in tears. And we just said, let's just pray. Let's pray and ask God what he wants us to do. Something's got to give, pun intended, you know? And so we prayed. Then we started talking about what God spoke to each of us. And it was amazing. He spoke some similar things as we prayed. One of them was, I want you to up your giving, which, by the way, we had nothing to up it with. I mean, we've been tithing and giving for a long time. Since I was a kid, I used to tithe on my birthday cards for my grandma and grandpa. That's how we did it in our house. God says, I want you to up your giving, be more generous. Then God said to Erin, I want to make sure, because she's the one that writes our tithe check every month, I want to make sure it's the first thing that comes out of your account. I know you never miss a tithe, but I want it to be, it's first fruit. It's just, I'm at the number one rung of the priority ladder. And so he said, cool. And then lastly, he said, I don't want any extra spending. It's just how God spoke to us. So we prayed an audacious prayer. We said, God, we're going to put you first. We know that open flow leads to overflow. We know sow comes before flow. So we decided to do it. Get this, a week later. Remember, we had just said no to a vacation. A week later, I'm not exaggerating, a single week later, I got a call from a friend who's a pastor in another state. And he said, hey, do you want to go to Hawaii? And I said, yeah, I would love to go to Hawaii, like 20 years from now when my kids are out of school and college is paid for, you know? And he's like, no, you don't understand. He said, I have a friend who used to be a pastor. He owns a huge car dealership. And they're running this promotion where for every person that buys a car, they can pick a couple to come with them and they will go to Hawaii. And I was like, this doesn't sound real. And he said, and I could have asked a million pastors. I have so many pastor friends, but immediately I saw your and Erin's face and I thought I'd ask you first. So I prayed about it for 20 seconds, you know. But here's the crazy thing. So he said, you're going to need to pay for a connecting flight to get to the hub city, but that's all you have to pay. But Erin and I had just committed to God. We're not spending extra money. Our budget was very tight right then. And so I actually told him, let me get back to you. And it hurt so bad. And so we get alone with God and we're like, God, seems like you want us to go on this trip. But if you want us to go, we would need a blessing above and beyond what our income is in 7 days. And I just determined if he doesn't want us to go, I'll go someday and it's not a big deal. I'm not in it for the blessing. It seemed like a cool opportunity. 6 days later, 1 day from the deadline, my friend keeps texting me, hey, do you know yet? Give just one more day. Somebody walks into our church in Boardman. We come to find out that a couple of couples in our church in Boardman saw we were only driving around one car. And they took it upon them. We will never ask anybody for money. We're very well taken care of. They felt God lead them to give us an amount of money. And so they had a guy that doesn't go to our church that was a relative, Italian guy, in a suit, walk into our church. And he's got a wad of cash in an envelope. And he says, are you Mr. Cameneti? And I'm like, I'm about to get whacked right now, you know? Hands me this envelope, and inside of it is enough money to get us into a beautiful car and enough money to pay for our trip to Hawaii. And can I tell you, Hawaii is beautiful. Free Hawaii is beautiful. Get this, a year later, October again, a year later, a couple that does not go to our church, we met them through a business connection. We were picking their brain. They heard that we were looking for a house. They're very wealthy business owners. Again, we did not tell them what we needed. For all they knew, we had all the money we needed to get in a house. We were just looking. We met with them. They drove back. And a couple weeks later, we get this card in the mail. Erin opens it. And it's the biggest check I've ever received in my life. And they said, we just felt like God said, this is for your down payment on your house. And we want you to know that God takes care of your needs. A year later, which would be just a month ago, we see this house and we think this house is beautiful. We've been looking for 2.5 years and just renting. And every time we'd see a house and put an offer in, it went contingent. And we could have been so frustrated, but we just said, God, I thank you that better's coming. We see this house in this one neighborhood and it's a little bit out of our league, but Erin was like, we should just walk through it, you know? That's how wives get you. Just walk through it, you know? The realtor is from Believers Church. She says, I know this man. He has a lot of money. He just built a beautiful house in another state. The worst that could happen is you write him the offer that you can give and just see if he accepts it. So we did one of those letters, We're a pastor's family. We're balling on a budget. This is going to insult you, but this is what we can offer, and we won't be offended if you say no. He counters at $35,000 under asking price and covers our closing costs. And we just moved in on Friday. Come on, somebody. God is good. Open flow leads to overflow. I don't say that to brag on anybody but God. We are not special. And he's no respecter of persons. And if he can do it in our life, he can do it in yours. Here's where we're going to end. I want to show you a short video. No sound, but I want to show you something I saw on a field trip with my son. I had a group of 5 middle school boys in our hotel room, and they all survived, and I returned them to their parents unscathed. That's a miracle in and of itself. It's a couple years ago, and I'm sitting at Great Wolf Lodge, and if you've been there, parents, grandparents, they have this huge bucket, and it's a 1,000-gallon bucket. And there's this pipe with water that's flowing into the bucket, and it slowly fills up until it reaches a tipping point, and then it pours out in the splash zone. All 1,000 gallons comes pouring out on all the people below it. Then it returns to its original position, and the water level slowly over 4 minutes fills back up until it reaches a tipping point and it pours out again. And I must have watched that 50 times that night as I'm watching the kids. And a couple years later, I'm writing this message, and God reminds me of this moment. And he says, Joe, this is what an overflowing life looks like. This is what it looks like to live in the open flow of my goodness and my blessing. Can you imagine being so confident in your connection to the source that even when you pour out whatever it is that God's asking, you're so confident that he's gonna fill you back up again to overflowing, and then pour it out again, and then fill you back up again and pour it out? Because here's the reality: what fills, spills. Can you imagine walking into your job and being so full of joy that you're overflowing with joy, and that the splash zone gets on all the people around you, and your coworker says, man, there's something different about her. I want what she has. Open flow leads to overflow. I want to end with this quote. Erwin McManus. If all of us applied generosity to the world would change overnight. Can you imagine what's possible if we all got a hold of this? Can you imagine what a church in Warren, Ohio, Boardman, Ohio, in the valley, can you imagine what God could do through a church that got a hold of that? I'm gonna invite you to bow your heads and close your eyes. For some of us, God's just gonna give us baby steps. One of us, he might be saying, hey, you need a bigger bucket, because the measure you pour out is the measure you'll receive. Some of us have some holes in our bucket from debt and bad spending, and God wants you to join Freed Up. That's a connect group that we're running, and we have an amazing discount, and Pastor Jimmy, who was here a few weeks ago, he's leading it, and it'll just help you to build better habits in your finances so we're godly stewards of what he's trusted us with. For some of us, God wants us to go through that generosity connect group. It's called Journey of Generosity. And if you're watching online, there's one in Boardman, there's one in Warren, and they'll start in the next 2 weeks. You can sign up for either of these things on the Church Center app. You can sign up out in the lobby today at your campus. I don't know what God's asking you to do, but I know he is giving you an invitation to a better life. And the blessed life is when we say, God, everything I have is yours. And I'm not looking to raise my standard of living. I'm looking to raise my standard of giving. And I don't want to be a stagnant pond. I want to be a flowing river. So use me and flow through me any way you want to. I talked about this more life that Jesus invites us into, and I would be remiss if we left today without me giving you this opportunity to receive this free gift. It's the ultimate act of generosity. So if you can't remember a moment in your life where you said, I don't just acknowledge there is a God, I acknowledge that Jesus is God and he is my Lord, and I'm letting him sit in the driver's seat of my life. He's calling the shots. Complete surrender. If you can't remember a moment in your life online, wherever you're watching from in the future, right here in the room in Warren, I want to lead you in a prayer. The Apostle Paul says it this way. He says, if you believe in your heart and you say with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, you'll be saved. It's that simple. You can't work to earn it. It's a free gift. And so if that's you and you can't remember a moment in your life where you prayed that prayer, can you pray this with me in church? If you've prayed this before, help us out. Let's pray together. Say, dear God, thank you for the free gift that came at such a high price that Jesus would lay his life down for me. God so loved me that he gave his only son. So I give you my life in return. I say I belong to you. I'm yours. And I won't be perfect, but I'll follow you with everything I've got. I'm a Christian. In Jesus' name. Amen. Heads bowed, eyes closed for 1 second longer. The Bible says heaven throws a party if one person on the planet prays that prayer. I love driving home and celebrating, even if one hand goes up. We had some in the first service today. It's so exciting. But if you say, Joe, that was me today. I made that decision and I'm excited about it. I'm going to just invite you to do something. I'm not going to have you come to the front or stand up, but I'd love to put a Bible in your hands and we'd love to celebrate with you. So if that's you, you say, I decided to follow Jesus and I'm excited about it. Can you just stick your hand boldly in the air? You say, Joe, I'm excited about the decision I made. Thank you. I see that hand. If you raised it once, you could raise it again. I see that hand. Thank you. Just give our host a minute to get around to you. If you should have raised it the first time, but you didn't, just stick it boldly up in the air. It'll change your life forever. It's the best decision you'll ever make.